In the context for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about that idea. There is a pastor in the Washington, D.C. area. Maybe some of you guys may have heard of him before. His name is Mark Batterson. He is a pastor at a church called National Community Church in Washington, D.C., and he is an author and a pastor. And he wrote a book about 2 years ago called Chase the Lion. And so what we're doing and what this series is about is the premise and the idea behind this book that he has called Chase the Lion. And when we talk about the term chasing the lion or referring to the lion over the next couple weeks, I want you to know that what we're talking about is these God-ordained dreams and these God-ordained desires that God gives us. And how so often in our lives we are too afraid, or there's too much fear to chase after what we believe God may be calling us to, or what God may be giving us, that we're afraid to chase after that, and fear takes over. And so what we're talking about in this idea and in this series for the next few weeks is about this idea of chasing the lion and chasing those God-ordained dreams and those desires that God has given us. Now, I know about you guys, all of us have favorite animals, right? Like we all been like my favorite animal is an elephant, or my favorite animal is this, or my favorite animal is a cheetah, or maybe you're like a lion is my favorite animal, like whatever it is. But we all kind of know of a lion. We've all seen lions. Maybe you haven't had the chance to go to Africa in the grasslands and see one live and close up, but we've all seen one at a zoo or something like that, right? I mean, they are big, they are powerful, they are huge animals, right? They call them the king of the jungle, which is interesting because they don't really live in the jungle, right? They live in grasslands and stuff in Africa, but they're called the king of the jungle. They travel in these packs called prides, and they hunt in these packs. As I was looking up and just trying to do a little bit of research about a lion in itself and what that looks like, they were saying some of the things that I read, that a lion's roar could be heard up to 5 miles away. I mean, think about that. I mean, that they're so big and so powerful that their roar could be heard 5 miles away. They're 500 pounds and can run up to some research said 35 miles an hour. Another website said 50 miles an hour. So I'm like, okay, you know what? If there's a 500-pound animal that can run 50 miles an hour to chase me down, like that's, you know what? Like, okay, he can be the king of the jungle, right? I mean, we're all familiar with lions, but when we talk about our own lives, what does it mean for us to chase the lion? What does it mean for us to chase after the lion? And as we talk over the next few weeks, there is this tension that is between faith and fear. That there's this tension that we have between fear and faith. And we think about this, and one of the things that I heard, or as I read through Mark Batterson's book, there was a quote that said this: if your dream doesn't scare you, it's too small. That if your dream doesn't scare you, it's too small. Like, we can often think of things, we can often say, you know what, man, like I really wish that I could do this, or God is calling me to that, or man, I really want to do this, or I really would love to go there, or I would really love to start this ministry, or I would really love to serve this way, or I would really love to maybe lead a connect group in my home, or I would want to do this, or I want to do that. But if your dream doesn't scare you, then it's too small. And basically what that's telling us this is that if you can accomplish it in your own power, then it's too small. If you can go do it on your own and you don't need God to show up in a mighty way, then your dream is just too small because you're not asking God to step into it. And so the only way to tap your God-given potential is to chase the lion. And it's that idea that we're going to look at over the next couple weeks. Now, I'm sure as a kid, we all had dreams, right? Like, man, when you were 5 years old or 6 years old or maybe 10 years old, you're like, when I grow up, I'm going to do this, right? We had dreams as kids. We had dreams as teenagers. Then life kind of happens and things come and you become an adult or a college student and then an adult, and then maybe you get married and you have kids and dreams start to change, right? My dream when I was a 12-year-old boy was I was either going to be one of two things, and I think I've shared this with you guys before, but I'll share it again. I was either going to be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, or I was going to be the starting point guard for the Los Angeles Lakers, right? You guys see how that worked out, right? I was a huge Magic Johnson fan. If you know who Magic Johnson is, he was my favorite basketball player. I would argue with you till I'm blue in the face that I still think he's the greatest of all time. And I for sure wanted to be just like Magic Johnson, and I was going to be the starting point guard for the Los Angeles Lakers. But got cut from the 10th grade basketball team, and that dream went up in smoke, right? But we all have dreams as kids, right? We all have dreams of things that we want to be. And maybe you get married and you have kids. And your dreams after chasing these huge, big, audacious, hairy goals, as they're called, big, audacious, hairy things, like these big monster goals. Maybe your goal is just that you raise your kids to love Jesus and to help all of your kids make sure they graduate high school, and maybe they go to college, maybe they go to technical school, maybe God calls them into the workforce, and that's your dream. Maybe your dream is just to be the best husband and leader of your home that you can be. God has given us all different goals and all different dreams. And so when we talk in the context of this series over the next couple weeks, and we talk about chasing after the lion, for someone like me who's a dreamer by nature, my dreams are big, and I have big visions and ideas for our church and for our family, and I'm a dreamer by nature. I can sit down for 5 minutes and dream up 20 years worth of stuff. But that's me. So I just want you to know, if God gives you big dreams like me, and I'm chasing the lion over here and chasing big things, or maybe God's just calling you to be the best mother and the best father, or the best husband, or the best wife, or the best college student, or the best teenager that you can be. Like, it doesn't have to be big things. It can be small things. And so our dreams and our goals can fit anywhere in a pretty wide spectrum this morning. And so I don't want for any second for you to go, well, I don't really have a big dream. I don't really have this big, audacious, crazy dream of planning a church and starting this and doing that and going here or being a missionary to Africa or doing this or doing that. Whether your dream is small or whether your dream is big, whatever it is, the idea is that we have to chase the lion. And so often in our lives, we have told ourselves, I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. I can't do this. I can't do that. God could never use me to do this. God could never use me to do that. And we talk ourselves out of, and the excuses begin to pile up of why we cannot chase after our dreams. And so then we allow fear to keep us from the dreams that God's given us. Because at the end of the day, we think that we are never going to attain exactly what it is that we'll never be able to reach it. So if I'm not going to be able to get to it, then why should I try? I'm never going to be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins because I was a Dan Marino fan as a kid. So I'm never going to do that, so I'll just give up on that dream. I'm never going to reach this goal of doing this, so there's no sense in really pursuing it. I'm just going to give up. I'll never be able to accomplish this, so I'm just going to give up. And so for the next few weeks, or the next 3 weeks, we're going to go back and look at King David, who we talk about often, but we're going to look at King David, but we're going to specifically look at a group of men that, if you're familiar with Scripture and you're familiar with 2 Samuel, there is a group of men in Samuel chapter 23 that they are called David's mighty men, or David's mighty warriors. And there is one specific guy who the video that you saw at the beginning of the message is all about, and it's that guy that we're going to look at. As you have your Bibles this morning, I want you to turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 23. And as you turn to 2 Samuel chapter 23, starting in verse 8, it begins to give you the list of all of these men that are known as David's mighty men. And they accomplish some pretty crazy things. Like they're killing multiple and hundreds of men by themselves, right? Like that's a pretty bad dude, right? If I'm going to kill 200 guys with my own spear, I'm a pretty bad guy. I'm going to kill, this happens and that happens, and there's all these stories and all these things about all of these men that do all these crazy feats and all this stuff. They're wielding their spears against 800 people who he killed at one time. And then there's this guy that rose up and struck down the Philistines, and this guy who rose up and did this, and this guy who rose up and did that. And so these men that David had surrounded himself, known as David's mighty men, are some pretty bad guys. Not bad in the context that they're bad people, but to the point that you're probably not the guy that you want to bump into and talk trash to, right? You probably find yourself dead. But as you get to verse 20, there's a couple of verses about a guy named Benaiah, and I want to read those verses, and it's the story of Benaiah that we're going to look at over the next couple weeks. And so look with me, 2 Samuel chapter 23, starting in verse 20. And it says, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab, which would be like 2 warriors of the city of Moab. 2 Ariels of Moab. He also went down and struck down a lion in a pit on a snowy day, or on a day when snow had fallen. And he struck down an Egyptian, a handsome man. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand. But Benaiah went down to him with a staff and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside the 3 mighty men. He was renowned among the 30, but did not attain to the 3. And David set him over his bodyguard. So in that scripture, there's the story of this guy named Benaiah. And it tells us that he himself went and fought 2 of Moab's, the city of Moab's, 2 of their greatest warriors. He fought them by himself and killed both of them. And then there's this little verse just dropped in the middle that he had killed this lion in a pit on a snowy day. And the video that you saw kind of showed this idea of this warrior and this lion crossing paths and their eyes meeting for the first time. And I don't know about you guys, but in that moment that I'm walking through the field or in the grasslands or wherever Benaiah was at that moment, and off in the distance I see a lion, my first reaction is not going to be to run towards the lion, right? Pastor Josh preached last week and told us if a polar bear walked in here, like he was going to push everyone out of the way so that he could get out the door, right? So we joked around about it last week, and then this week we kick off this idea about this lion walking, the Benaiah and this lion crossing paths, I should say. But Benaiah, being the warrior that he was and being the man that he was, he chases after this lion, and the lion falls into the pit. And at that moment, most of us would have said, okay, I'm good. I'm safe. The lion fell in the pit. I don't have to do anything. I'm going to keep going on my merry way wherever Benaiah was heading at that moment. But in that moment, Benaiah in the video, and I don't know if this is how he went down, but in the video it gives us an idea. He looks down in the pit. He sees the lion. And he jumps down into the pit. None of us in this room would make that decision to jump into the pit with a lion. If you say you would, you're lying, right? I'm just kidding, right? And so he jumps into the pit. And him and the lion, who knows how the fight went down, but all we know is that at the end of the day, Benaiah is victorious. Tells us another story where there's an Egyptian with a spear, and Benaiah has a staff, and he goes down and just snatches the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and kills him with his own spear, right? If somebody takes your weapon and then kills you with it, that's a pretty bad dude. Because I'm sure this Egyptian was a pretty trained warrior as well. And so we get this idea. And so I just want us to think for just a moment. To imagine this moment with Benaiah and this lion crossing paths and eyes meeting and them running towards each other and the lion falling in the pit and Benaiah making the decision at that moment to jump down in the pit to chase after the lion. So I have a couple thoughts or a couple ideas for you guys today, and this is the first one. That we all have a big dream. That we all have a big dream. That by definition, a God-sized dream will be beyond your ability and beyond your resources. That unless God does it, it can't be done. And that is exactly how God will get the glory at the end of the day. That if it's beyond your ability and it's beyond your resources, and the only way this is going to happen is that God shows up in a mighty way so that God can get all the glory, then that's what gives us a God-sized dream. Yesterday we had this block party out at the property, at our new property, that we're going to be moving to hopefully in the next couple weeks. A year and a half ago, when the South Florida Baptist Association approached me and said, hey, would you guys be interested in this building? And me and Tim Lister, who's the head of our finance team, go and meet out at the building and meet Richard, the guy that heads up our association, to walk through the inside of the building. Like in that moment, I felt like this is where God's calling us. It made no sense. It makes no sense. At the time, we were a church of like 40 people. Now we're up to around 60 or 70, right? We had 80 people a couple weeks ago, but a year and a half ago, we're 40 people, maybe 50 on a good Sunday. But in that moment, I felt like, man, this is where God's calling us. And in that moment, God began to birth something inside of me of what this thing could look like. It's beyond our ability. It's beyond our resources. And everything had to fall in place in order for us to be able to make the move in the first place. Like all the financing for the construction loans and all these things had to fall into place and all this stuff had to happen. And this fell through and that fell through and this wasn't going to happen and this didn't happen and then this came our way. And then we found ourselves at a crossroad where it's like, hey, if the Florida Baptist Convention doesn't give us the construction loan that we need, there's no way that we're going to be able to move forward because fundraising hasn't gone all that well. And the Florida Baptist Convention decides to loan us the money that we need to fix this building up, which makes no sense because we're a small church with limited resources. But they believed enough in us and have believed enough in our vision that they said unanimously, their board of directors voted to give us everything that we needed. That's a God thing. Absolutely. Because on paper, it makes no sense. It's beyond our ability and it's beyond our resources. William Carey, who was a missionary and minister in the 17 and 1800s, has this famous quote. It says, expect great things from God and attempt great things for God. Expect great things from God and attempt great things for God. That if we want to go where few people are, then we got to do what few people do. That so often in our lives when God gives us a dream, and we all have a big dream. Your dream may be different than my dream. And the person to your left's dream may be different than yours. And the person behind you's dream may be different. But we all have a big dream. Your dream may seem small to me. And your dream may seem small to me, and my dreams may seem small to you. But in your heart and in your mind, man, it's a big dream. And that maybe you had this big dream, but then there's this sense of it just kind of falling away due to whatever. This happened, that happened, this came our way, this came our way, this happened. And whatever may have happened, our dream fell away. But here's one of the things that I know about our big dreams is that we need people around us in order to accomplish our dreams. We need people around us in order to accomplish our dreams. Yeah, we walked into an empty, vacant building that was nasty and gross and busted up and full of asbestos and all kinds of nasty stuff. And we walked in that building a year and a half ago. But in that moment, I felt like, man, this is where God's calling us. But if it wasn't for Tim and our finance team, if it wasn't for Jordan and John, our staff at the time, and now for Tim and Fred to come be part of our staff, and if it wasn't for Kim, my wife, who's the biggest supporter in the planet and puts up with me, which you guys don't even know, right? She deals with all these crazy dreams. Like if it wasn't for the team of people that God has assembled around Kim and I, like we would never be able to accomplish this. Somebody made the comment to me yesterday, Tim, who just came and been part of our staff in the last month, was like, yesterday was his first event with us. First event, he and Penny put the block party together and planned that and did that. And he walks up to me afterwards and he's like, bro, you got rock stars at this church. I'm like, I know, man. He's like, I thought we were going to be here until 3 o'clock tearing down. It's 1:45 and we're done. I'm like, bro, our people work really hard. They work really, really hard. We're able to pull events off like this even as a small church because people like you guys serve so faithfully in the way that you give, in the way that you serve. But you got to have people around you in order to accomplish your dreams. So even in the big context as a church, this is the vision and this is the direction that we're moving towards this new building. But even in a smaller context, we have connect groups that will be coming together and we'll be meeting together in homes all around the town, all around Lakeland, and different various nights of the week. And so we'll have these connect groups that will meet on Saturdays and Sundays, and maybe one will meet during the week. And those connect groups will be able to pray for each other and be there for each other and do life with one another. Like Connect Group is this amazing opportunity. It's so much different and in ways so much better than church in itself. Like rows are great, and you come and you listen to some music and you listen to me preach each week, or one of our other pastors share a message with you, and we tear down a cafeteria and we turn it back into a cafeteria, and then we leave and we go home. But man, there's something special about a Connect Group when you got 6 or 8 people who can know your struggles and know exactly what's going on and can pray with you and be with you and do life with you. Life is so much better in a circle than it is in a row. And soon we'll be able to launch that as we move into the building and have connect groups for people to get together with. Our college students will have one on Tuesday nights. Our youth will have one on Wednesday nights. And then we'll have other groups that meet throughout the week. But we got to have people around us in order to accomplish our dreams. The second idea is this, is that your big dream is on the other side of fear. That your big dream is on the other side of fear. When we got ready to, and some of you guys will be familiar with this story, when I'm a student pastor and kind of outreach pastor at Fuel Church, which is a church in North Lakeland, deep North Lakeland. And God started to plant this idea in my heart about planting City Place Church and what that would look like. And as it began to become a reality, and as it began to become a real thing, and the staff and the elders at Fuel knew, and I began to share with some of my other youth pastor friends and some of my other youth pastor friends at that time, some of them's response to me is like, bro, are you crazy? Why would you leave a great job at Fuel where you're loved and your staff is good and your youth group is great and you've got a big youth group and you got all these things and everything's great and you got a solid salary and you got all this stuff, and wait, you're going to leave all of that to go plant a church and not get paid anything for a little bit? Like, that makes no sense. Why would you leave the security of the church that you have to go step out and do something else? It's because our big dream is on the other side of fear. So often, we allow the fears that are in our life to keep us from doing what it is that God is calling us to do because we're scared. But in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, it tells us this. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. That fear doesn't come from God. That the fear that we feel so often, that doesn't come from God. That comes from the other side. That comes from the evil one himself that convinces us so often not to take the step of faith, or not to do the thing that we're supposed to, or step out for God, or do this or do that. And so our big dreams may be on the other side of fear, but it tells us in the scripture, as Paul writes to Timothy, that God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but He gave us a spirit of power, and He gave us a spirit of love, and He gave us a spirit of self-control. That's what comes from God. Power and love and self-control, and not of fear. There's a song out right now by a guy named Zach Williams, and it basically tells us that fear is a liar, right? That's the name of the song. That fear is a liar. That fear will tell you that you aren't capable. That fear will tell you that you can't do this. That fear will tell you that you can't do that. That fear will tell you, dude, don't ever step out and leave and go and plant a church, because it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be small for a couple years, and it's going to be hard, and you're not going to get paid much, and this isn't going to happen, and that's not going to happen, and just stay where you are. Don't leave your job and do this. Don't do that. Don't push your kids to do this, because then they may push back. Like, whatever those fears may be, fear convinces us that we're not supposed to step into what God has called us to or what God has for us. And so then we pull back, and fear lies to us. We got to punch fear in the face, right? Like, just step into it. Like, you ever seen those arcade video games with like the punching bag thing, right? And if you just stand in front of it, it tells you how much of a man or woman you are by how much pressure you can hit, by how hard you punch something, right? And so often somebody will stay flat-footed and they just try to hit it and it barely moves. And then you got the one guy who wants to show off and he like rears back and he misses and almost kills himself, right? Which is always funny. But then you got the other guy that knows exactly how to punch somebody. And he steps into the punch, man, and he just hits it. Like, that's the idea. We got to step into it. We've got to step into the fear. We can't allow God to keep us from what He's calling us to because we're scared. You guys that have been around me for a while know that I love definitions, because I think it gives us context of what we're talking about. So when you think about the definition of courage, I'm going to give you 3 different definitions of courage. They're going to be up on the screens, but here's the first one. Courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. The ability to do something that frightens one. You're willing to step into something that someone else would never step into. You're willing to do something for your wife or for your kids that your neighbor wouldn't do for his wife and for his kids. Or you're willing to do something for your husband because, even though your friends tell you that you're crazy, so that you can do this. Or college students get a big dream and God starts planting something on your heart and other people tell you not to, and we just need to step into that. Our teenagers get an idea and maybe they step into something that somebody else is scared to. Everybody else at the table is afraid to pray over their food at lunch because they don't want to pray at school because that's weird, and you just take the courage to pray when everybody else is scared to. The second definition is this: that courage is the strength in the face of pain or grief. Some of you are going through some stuff right now. Like, we just finished up a series called Overload for the last 3 weeks, talking about our schedules and our finances. And Pastor Josh preached a great message last week about our emotions. But some of you are going through some pain, and some of you are going through some grief, and some of you have some baggage and some things that are holding on to you. Courage is the ability and the strength to push through that. Every Sunday morning at 9:50, we do a pre-service for our volunteers. I'll share a short message or a short idea or cast some vision, and we sing one song and we pray just to kind of get our heads right after the busy morning of getting things finally set up and everything put in place, just to get our hearts and our minds right. And this week, I didn't share a message with them per se. I just shared with all of our volunteers about how our staff and a lot of families in our church have just kind of felt under attack this week. Like, there's been all kinds of craziness that's just been happening in our lives. Like with our families and our kids and our marriages, and this breaking and this car accident and 2 flat tires in a week and AC's broken and all these things happening. Like, I literally, on Thursday, like, I had this crazy situation happen to me, and it was unbelievable. And you take a step back and go, man, what could have happened from that? If something, 2 seconds later, if something changes, what could have happened from that? And for me, for you, it may seem like this crazy thing, but for me, I just felt like it was a spiritual attack, like one thing after the other this week. And some of you may be weirded out by this idea of spiritual warfare and spiritual attacks and stuff, but it's legit and it's real. But courage is the strength in the face of pain or grief to keep pushing. So if you're beat up right now, if you're down right now, if your life seems crazy right now, if everything around you seems to be falling apart, courage is having the strength to push through that. The third idea is this: the ability to control fear and be willing to deal with something that is dangerous, difficult, or unpleasant. The ability to control fear and to be willing to deal with something that is dangerous, difficult, or unpleasant. Just because you step into your dream, just because you step into something that's a little scary, just because you're a little bit fearful, just because you're not sure, man, I don't know if I'm supposed to be able to control that fear and to be able to step into that shows courage. This past week was the anniversary of 9/11. Many of us would know that that's an event that none of us will ever forget. Where you were in that moment, there are significant moments in the history of our country that you know where you were in that moment. When the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up, I remember being at lunch in 5th grade, right? But this week we had the ability and the opportunity to celebrate 9/11. And the courage of those first responders and the police officers and the firefighters and the people that ran in and pulling people from buildings and all of these things. And the courage that those people showed of what they were able to do, the people that were losing their lives trying to rescue other people. It's a dangerous, it's a difficult, it's an unpleasant, horrific event. But yet there were so many people who show so much courage in those moments. But we can't allow fear to dictate our actions or our dreams. Because your big dream is on the other side of fear. Mark Batterson, the guy that wrote this book that we're basing this series off of, has a really famous quote, and it says that if your prayers aren't impossible to you, they are insulting to God. That if your prayers aren't impossible to you, they are insulting to God. And here's what he means by that. That so often in our prayer lives, we pray, God, will you give me power to do this? And God, will you give me power to do this? And God, will you help me to do that? And God, will you help me to do this? Very often do we pray, God, if you don't show up, this isn't going to happen. God, if you don't move today, this life's not going to be changed. God, if you don't show up today, my marriage isn't going to be restored. God, if you don't show up, this isn't going to be restored. God, if you don't show up, my family's not going to be fixed. God, if you don't show up, this isn't going to happen. God, if you don't show up today, we're never going to be able to get this building over off of Longfellow Boulevard. That if our prayers don't seem impossible to us, then they're almost insulting to God because He has something better and something bigger and something planned for us. Which leads us to the third idea. That chasing your dream comes down to a decision. That chasing your dream comes down to a decision. In the midst of chasing after a dream, whatever your dream may be, whether how small it is or how big you believe that it is, when it comes to chasing your dream, it comes down to a decision. Am I going to fight for my dream, or am I going to flight, or am I going to run from my dream? It's a fight or flight thing. This situation seems impossible. This situation seems tough. This situation that I'm in right now, the situation that I'm going through seems impossible. And God doesn't show up. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to run from it. I'm just going to stick my head in the sand, as Kim and I like to say, and just hope that in the end of the day, it just goes away. When I pull my head out, 2 days later, a week later, a month later, 5 years later, it's just going to have gone away. I'm either going to run from it or I'm going to fight for it. I'm either going to step into it or I'm going to run away. You have a decision when it comes to your dreams, regardless of how small or how big you believe that they are. I saw a survey this week, and it talked about people, and it asked people, I should say, what is their greatest regrets? And so often in our lives, we would say that at the end of our life, your greatest regret isn't going to be the things that you did but wish you hadn't done. Those actions in your life. If I ask you, hey, have you ever done something that you wish you hadn't done? I'm going to guess that every hand in the room would go up, because last time I checked, none of us are perfect. That's not going to be your greatest regret. Your greatest regret will be the things that you didn't do but you wish that you had. Your greatest regret isn't going to be the actions that you took, the things that I wish that I would taken back. It's going to be the things that you didn't step into, the things that you wish that you had done. Even if it's something small. Man, I really wish when I had that opportunity to go skydiving that I would have gone skydiving, right? I would never say that, by the way. Man, I had that opportunity to do this. Man, I wish that I had done that. When I had the opportunity to pray for my kid in that moment, man, I wish that I had. When I had that opportunity to step into that job offer that I just didn't think was the right one, but man, 2 months later, I knew that it was. Man, I really wish that I had stepped into this. I really wish that I had done that. It's not the actions of our life that we're going to regret. It's the inactions of our life that we're going to regret. Someday, when I'm old and gray and sitting in a rocking chair, hopefully on a cabin in the middle of the mountains somewhere, no one around me, and I'm rocking myself and humming Bible hymns because that's what my grandma used to do, right? I don't want to look back at my life and go, man, I wish I had done this. And I wish I had done that. And I wish that I had taken that chance. And I wish that I had stepped into that. And I wish that I had done that. The chasing our dreams come down to a decision. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, you can write these verses down and read them later, but in Deuteronomy chapter 31, starting in verse 6 through 8, it says this: Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in sight of all of Israel, Be strong and courageous, for you shall go with these people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers and to give them. And you shall put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear and do not be dismayed. That is, Moses is handing over his leadership mantle to Joshua. He tells them these famous words of do not be discouraged, or be strong and be courageous, that the Lord is with you wherever you go. When you're faced with this decision, do I run from my dream or do I step into my dream? You got to know that if it's a God-ordained dream, then it's something that God will always be with you. He will never leave you and He will never forsake you. Now, I'm not telling all of you to run out tomorrow and quit your jobs. That is not what I'm telling you, right? Pastor Kevin said chase the dream, right? I'm not telling you that. But if God has stirred something in your heart, and if God has stirred something in your soul, and God has something for you, and you don't know what it looks like to step into, I want you to know this: that He will always be with you. He will never leave you, and He will never, ever, ever forsake you. Philippians 4:13 tells us that in all things, right, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. That if the God is ordaining it in you, and if God is giving it to you, then He is going to be with you. And so when you're faced with the decision, do I run or do I stay and fight? Do I chase after the dream? You got to know, if it's a God-ordained thing, He's always going to be with you. That the only way for us to tap our God-given potential is to chase the lion. So I want to read. There's this, if you're familiar with the term manifesto. There's this Lion Chasers manifesto that I want to read to you this morning as we get ready to wrap things up. It's a little long, but follow with me. Because if we're going to be lion chasers, then this is kind of our motto. It says, quit living as if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. Set God-sized goals. Pursue God-ordained passions. Go after a dream that is destined to fail without divine intervention. Keep asking questions. Keep making mistakes. Keep seeking God. Stop pointing out problems and become part of the solution. Stop repeating the past and start creating the future. Stop playing it safe and start taking risks. Expand your horizons. Accumulate experiences. Enjoy the journey. Find every excuse you can to celebrate everything you can. Live like today is the first day and the last day of your life. Don't let what's wrong with you keep you from worshiping what's right with God. Burn sinful bridges. Blaze new trails. Criticize by creating. Worry less about what people think and more about what God thinks. Don't try to be who you're not. Be yourself. Laugh at yourself. Don't let fear dictate your decisions. Take a flying leap of faith. Chase a lion. So I ask you this morning as we get ready to wrap things up, what's your lion? What is it that's in front of you that if I told you you had this fear or this symbol of fear that you have, what is the lion that you could chase after? Batterson says faith is the willingness to look foolish. That faith is the willingness to look foolish. When everybody else around you says, man, that makes no sense. That you would leave a great paying job to go do what? When I left the corporate world to go into ministry world and I left a 6-figure salary on the table to go be a part-time youth pastor making like $200 a week, it made no sense. My company I left literally thought I was on drugs, right? My boss, who had a great relationship with, goes, bro, do we need to give you a drug test? You don't even know if you got the youth pastor job and you're quitting? I'm like, yeah, man, you're not a man of faith. You don't understand. But let me explain to you what it means. Like, faith is the willingness to look foolish. It's the willingness to step out on the edge and go, man, God, if you don't show up and I'm about to fall off this cliff, if you don't show up in a mighty way, God, I don't know what's going to happen. Noah built a boat when everybody thought he was crazy. David fought an 8-foot giant in Goliath. Peter stepped out of the boat and began to walk on water. Jesus climbed up on a cross, knowing exactly what was going to happen. But sometimes if we fail, failure can be a good thing. Like if you failed at something, you should have learned something. And sometimes failure can be a good thing because in that way we're more dependent on God and less dependent on ourselves. Because if you're a strong-willed personality like me and you just think you can do it and you step out and do it and you fail, then you're like, God, you know what? Because maybe I need instead of me doing it on my own. So I'm going to ask you this question and I'm going to pray us out. And we're going to go back into worship. What's the scariest dream that you could go after? What's the scariest dream that you could go after? Because the only way to tap your God-given potential is to chase the lion. So I'm going to ask you this morning to close your eyes and to bow your heads for me for just a moment.